Welcome to Jester Politics' 2 video series on Jews, the most persecuted people in the history of mankind. In 2 days, it'll be October 7th, 2025, marking the second year since Hamas terrorists swarmed out of Gaza and into Israel, where they tortured, raped, and murdered about 1,200 people and took another 251 hostage. They then returned to a carnival-like atmosphere in Gaza, where they were greeted by their adoring fans as conquering heroes. In this first video, we'll discuss the historical persecution of Jews that led up and, to be quite frank, paved the way for this horrific act that occurred on October 7th. The second video will discuss October 7th and its aftermath. As an initial matter, I want to address the silly argument that somehow the Jews living in modern-day Israel are occupiers or colonizers. To the contrary, the Jews settled the land of Canaan in 1258 BC, and at the time of King David's death in 970 BC, the Kingdom of Israel included much of what is today Jordan and Lebanon, along with the West Bank. Given that the Kingdom of Israel existed 1,580 years before the founding of Islam, and 1,608 years before Umar ibn al-Khattab conquered Jerusalem and established the Arab Caliphate, it is the Arabs, not the Jews, who are the colonizers. And if you buy into the colonization argument, they're the ones that have to leave what is now modern-day Israel, the West Bank, much of Jordan, and almost half of Lebanon. Simply put, the fact-free argument that the Jews are modern-day colonizers in the land of Israel is nothing more than an attempt to justify the continuing persecution of the Jews, a persecution that started in 722 BC, and which has been continuous since then. With the death of King David in 970 BC, the Kingdom of Israel was split into two. The northern kingdom, which retained the name Kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom, which became the Kingdom of Judea. In 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom and forced the Jews living there to be dispersed throughout the Assyrian Empire. This is one of the first, if not the first, recorded instances of ethnic cleansing in the history of the world, and is the beginning of the Jewish diaspora. The southern kingdom, or the Kingdom of Judea, would fall to the Babylonians in 586 BC. The Jews again established the Kingdom of Judea in 142 BC as a result of revolting against the Greeks. However, the Romans conquered Judea in 63 BC, and after a series of Jewish revolts, they renamed the land of Israel Palestine and deported, sold as slaves, or killed hundreds of thousands of Jews. In spite of these catastrophes, the Jews would maintain a presence in the land of Israel continuously from 1258 BC until today. However, many Jews started migrating to other areas, including India, Africa proper, throughout North Africa, and Europe. They didn't come as conquerors, they came just as people looking for a place that they could safely live and practice their religion. Unfortunately, with the exception of Muslim-ruled southern Spain, they were barely tolerated at best, and often they were the subject of mass murders. On their way to reclaim the Holy Land from the Arab Caliphate in 1096, the First Crusade took time out to unleash a wave of anti-Semitic violence on Jewish communities in France and the Holy Roman Empire, including massacres in Worms, Tyre, and Metz. In 1144, the first recorded instance of a blood libel took place. In 1171, the first deaths from a blood libel occurred in France when a servant falsely accused Jews of throwing Christian children into the river. The proof? Well, a Catholic bishop tested the veracity of the servant by seeing if the servant floated on water. The servant did, and so 31 Jews, including 17 women and some children, were burned to death. Things only got worse from there. In 1242, there was the first public burning of the Talmud and took place in Paris. 1290, all Jews were expelled from England. 1298, a lord in Germany gathered a mob and set them on killing Jews and destroying Jewish towns. At the end of it, over 145 communities in France, Bavaria, and Austria were destroyed, with an unknown number of Jews killed for the crime of being Jewish. During the Black Plague of 1346 to 1353, of course, the Jews were blamed for that. First because they were Jewish, and then later because they were falsely accused of poisoning wells. The violence was so bad that by 1390, the Jewish communities of France, Germany, and England almost disappeared completely. In Frankfurt alone, there were 19,000 Jews in 1350. By 1400, there were not even 10. As bad as this violence against Jews were, it was just a warm-up to the Spanish Inquisition that kicked off in 1478 and would last until 1808 and expand to Portugal. During this time, an estimated 31,912 people were burned in Spain. An additional 1,800 were burned at the stake in Portugal. In 1790, Russia gained Ukraine, Lithuania, and Moldavia from Poland, and Catherine the Great promptly ruled that the Jews could only live in what was termed the Pale of Settlement, which consisted of Ukraine, Belarus, and eastern Poland. And let's not forget the Russian secret police publishing the fraudulent Elders of Zion and the pogroms of the late 18th century and early 19th century, which were mobs that targeted Jews in Russia. As horrific as the persecution and mass murder of Jews were from 722 BC to 1930 AD, it paled in comparison with the rise of the Nazis. Though the Nuremberg laws are without a doubt the most famous anti-Semitic laws passed by the Nazis, they are in reality only two of over 400. However, the true horrors of Nazi Germany would not rear its ugly head until 1941, when the final solution was implemented by establishing 4 Eisengruppen units that followed the German army into Russia with the purpose of killing Jews. By the time the Nazis were chased out of Russia, these 4 units would kill over 1,500,000 Jews. Not satisfied with the slow pace of shooting Jews, the Germans would build a series of extermination camps, the most infamous of which was Auschwitz-Birkenau. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum estimates that between 5,900,000 and 6,200,000 Jews would be killed by the Nazis. Put another way, that's 59% of the Jewish population of Europe would be murdered by the Nazis. I wish I could say America was above anti-Semitism, but we're not. In May 1939, the German liner St. Louis sailed from Hamburg, Germany, with 908 Jewish refugees. Canada, the U.S., and Cuba all denied the refugees entry to their countries, and as a result, they returned to Europe. 254 of them would die in the Holocaust. 3 months before the St. Louis sailed, congressional leaders killed a plan to allow 20,000 more Jewish children to immigrate from Germany to the U.S. And in 1940, the State Department cut refugee immigration by 75%. And in 1941, the State Department put the nix on a plan by the U.S. Virgin Islands to have Jewish refugees resettled there. The fact that Britain denied entry to 500,000 Jews, and Canada, Australia, South Africa, and France before it fell all denied entry to Jewish refugees does not make America's inaction any less abhorrent. And though I truly believe that there's less anti-Semitism in the U.S. than most countries, the U.S. still has a long way to go. Using hate crimes per 100,000 population shows that the Jews are targeted far more often than any other identifiable group in the U.S. In fact, only one time since 1993 has any identifiable group had more hate crimes committed against it than the Jews, and that occurred in 2001 after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. What's even more disturbing is that in 2023 and 2024, after the Hamas terror attacks on October 7th, the hate crimes against Jews per 100,000 exceeded the hate crimes against Muslims per 100,000 in 2001. Think about it. How can anti-Semitic hate crimes against Jews increase after Hamas terrorists entered Israel and killed, raped, and tortured over 1,200 people and took another 251 hostage? It makes no sense. And I don't understand why people have such hatred for Jews. They've been loyal to this country since they came here, and they fought in every war since our independence, including the Revolutionary War. In World War II, 550,000 Jewish Americans were members of the American Armed Forces. And of that number, 38,338 were casualties, 11,000 of whom were killed. When stripped of the anti-Semitic rhetoric, American Jews are in reality just patriotic American citizens who worship God in a slightly different manner than many. From this day forward, I don't want to ever hear another person call them American Jews or Jewish American. They're just Americans. To be blunt, it's long past time that the people of the world stop blaming Jews for their own failings. And with that, I'll say good night. Be good.